All right, welcome to episode 6 of So What Do You Do? I created this podcast as a way to give out free and public information to college students, professionals looking to make a career shift, and upper management wanting to learn more about early career professionals and their experience in their industries thus far. Today we have my sixth guest, the extremely hardworking, multi-talented, and highly successful Connor Olson. Connor, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I know before the episode started, we were talking about your very busy schedule, and we'll get into all that. But just really appreciate
Sure.
your time here. So the first question I have for you is the same question I ask all my guests. It actually happens to be the title of the show, and that is, so
Mhm.
what do you do?
Yeah. So I do a lot of different things. I think primarily, first and foremost, I kind of identify as an attorney. Um, and there's a bunch of different stuff that people do within the law. I'm engaged in civil litigation. I focus primarily on employment, consumer protection, and business disputes and fraud. So it's a big kind of area, and there's a lot of even sub areas within that. But I used to work at big firms doing defense, and so I kind of got exposure to a lot of stuff. And now I've flipped over to the plaintiff side, started my own firm about 7 years ago. And it used to be whatever walked through the door I'd take, and now I'm sort of a little more selective on what I take. But those are kind of the primary areas. Um, and then throughout the week, I sit on several different boards, some attorney related, some not. And then once a week, I'm a commercial baker. So I get into a kitchen and I deliver banana bread to a few coffee shops in Sacramento on the weekends.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're a commercial baker. When I found that out, I was like, what does Connor not do? He's an attorney, he's a baker, you're doing it all. So you did throw out some, I think, really important legal terms within your description of your job. Could you just briefly go over what does it mean to be in civil litigation, and then maybe what it means to be on the or what it looks like to be on the defense side versus being on the plaintiff side?
Yeah. So it might help to just talk about the giant umbrella of law, right? So people go into law school and there's so many different things you can do. So something people might be familiar with is kind of defense or criminal law. So uh, district attorneys, they're prosecutors, criminal defense attorneys, right? So they're engaged in the criminal law aspect of it. There is also non-litigation, which is you might be helping corporations get started, right? So if you want to start a business and you want to get incorporated, there's many different things you need to do. There's state filings that you need to do to make sure you're in compliance. If you have, partners or investors, you're going to need business agreements. You're going to need incorporating documents. So there's this whole area, and then kind of outside of that, and typically when those types of business arrangements go awry or there's issues, people end up suing each other, and that's civil litigation. It's when you go to the courts and you say, "Hey, court, we have a dispute. We can't work it out amongst ourselves," or sometimes attorneys step in and do some pre litigation dispute. But um, I really take the reins at the point where the parties are past sort of that reconciliation point. And so, some attorneys do both plaintiff side and defense. Some people only do one or the other. People are familiar with maybe personal injury, right? So if you get in a car accident, attorneys typically on in that area tend to either be plaintiff side, so they represent the injured victim, right? Or they tend to be defense side, and they're representing like a car manufacturer or something. And usually in that case, they are there because they're getting paid by insurance companies or whatnot. I am primarily plaintiff side, probably 90%. And there's a few reasons for that, why I do that. Larger firms tend to do defense just because of kind of how the economics work of it. But in California, the laws are set up in such a way that, at least for employees and consumers, it's really easy. So like someone can walk through my door and say, "Hey, I think I was wrongfully terminated, or I wasn't paid my wages accurately." And California law says your employer, if found liable, actually owes you money for your attorney's fees. So I'm able to take on clients on a contingency which means that they don't have to pay me up front. More often than not, I'm able to advance all fees and costs, so like filing fees, experts, that type of stuff. And so that really puts my clients on a level playing field with these giant defense firms that have really unlimited budgets. Um, and so that's, there's so many different aspects of law, what you can do. But that's, I've kind of found my niche there.
That's great to hear. Yeah, so it sounds like do you do non-litigation too? Do you ever do work on the side where you're not going into court?
Yeah, so we'll try to resolve disputes before they get into court. So, like, demand letters, kind of like, hey, here's our claims. And more often than not, people want to avoid going to court. And so we'll be able to settle. It's really when they don't. If you ask my insurance company who does my malpractice, I don't do any corporate work, right? I'm like, no, I don't. I'll have friends that are like, hey, I need some help here or there, and I'll help them out. So whether that's very basic kind of corporate filings, I advise several nonprofits, kind of just on general stuff, and I'll do employment advisement and counseling too for some of these nonprofits. So they're sort of like, hey, we don't want to break the law. We want to make sure we're paying our employees right. We want to make sure our wage statements are accurate. And so I can look at that and kind of audit them and say, yes, this is correct, or no, this isn't.
So it sounds like both in non-litigation work and litigation-related work, you're typically on the civil side, correct? Do you do any criminal litigation or any criminal work?
I don't touch that stuff. So attorneys, you know, smart attorneys, I'll say, will really stay in their lane. And I kind of joked earlier about my insurance company malpractice. If you have a duty to ethically represent someone, and if you don't have the knowledge, you can land on some landmines essentially and fall into these traps and really open up your client to liability. So you're not really doing them any favors. Um, and that's something when I was green behind the ears, I wanted to do everything and help everybody. And then you really realize that, by taking on the stuff that you're really, that you're knowledgeable and good at, that's how you're most effective.
Yeah, it sounds like you staying in your lanes, so to speak, has also really empowered you to ethically practice law. You're helping these clients that are up against, highly resourceful corporations when they may have been discriminated against in a suit where, the client assumes or feels like they had been wrongfully fired or terminated. So it seems like a very ethical way to practice law. I do want to take it back just a little bit here. What was that first process of you finding the field of law? What sparked your initial interest in this in high school, out of high school, during college, whenever it was?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I've kind of had an interesting, I guess, process in getting to law because I know, when I was at law school, a lot of people were like, I watched Legally Blonde and I knew I wanted to be an attorney, or my dad's an attorney. They had that kind of connection. I'd never stepped foot in a law firm before I went to law school. Um, I didn't know any attorneys. Well, I worked at a place called Bohemian Grove where I was kind of actually a butler for attorneys and very wealthy people. So I was exposed to that a little bit. But I went to college at Sonoma State and I played tennis, and I was really just into tennis, and I was, into partying, and I didn't really necessarily think past that. I was like, maybe I'll play pro tennis, honestly. Um, I was a little naive as that into that, and just kind of bright-eyed, bushy-tail. I'm like, I'm gonna go play tennis and travel the world kind of thing. And um, I come from a family that really values education, like higher education. My dad's side, he's first gen Jew. You're either a doctor or an accountant. And I think my mom grew up in a time where women did have a lot more barriers. And so for her, it was like, you need to get education. That's how you do it. And funny enough, she met my dad. She was teaching at UC Davis Medical School. My dad was a medical student. Um, and so that's how they met. And so I think in the back of my mind, I kind of always knew that, you know, I needed to do some type of higher education. And the cool thing about law is you can have any degree. I had a criminal justice degree from Sonoma State, and it was, you know, for lack of a better phrase, it was a cop shop. Most people went into law enforcement. That wasn't the path I wanted. I enjoy the study of criminology. I still listen to murder mysteries. I go to bed listening to Dateline every night. Um, so, that was more of like an interest. And then kind of by my senior year, I was like, well, what am I going to do? I'm not going to play pro tennis. I kind of had a bad shoulder, kind of came to the realization, I'm not going to be the next Roger Federer. And so law school just kind of made sense. And I took the LSAT. I did decent enough, and ended up going to Santa Clara. But again, still very, what is law? What can I do with law? And so I feel like my path has kind of been watered down a hill, just kind of the path of least resistance. And so that was kind of just what seemed like the next step for me, based on the options I had. And so that's how I ended up at law school. It really wasn't a plan, or any type of desire to, be a lawyer or anything like that. It just kind of happened.
Oh, that's really interesting. I've had multiple guests now, all from completely different industries, all very successful in their own right. And it's fascinating how almost every guest that comes on, it's kind of like the path of least resistance is the one they took, and they somehow just kept moving forward and ending up in a place that now they think it's sustainable long term. So I'm happy to hear that is the case for you. So can you break us down the process, or kind of explain to us how you went from um, finally going to law school at Santa Clara to finding that, I'm interested in civil litigation and this is something I want to do. What was the first thing that got you into that law specifically?
Yeah. So, I wouldn't say this is what I was thinking at the time, but broadly speaking, civil litigation is very competitive, and I had that competitive spirit from being a tennis player. Um, and backing up, I guess, a little bit even more. Um, your first year of law school is this kind of interesting thing where everyone takes the same classes. You have kind of you're in similar classes with everybody, and you have blind grading, which means no professors know you. You're just a number, and those grades are really important that first year. And I ended up doing pretty well. I think I was in the top few people. And so what happens was, well, top, I guess, like 5 or 10% or whatever it is. What happens is law firms will come and say, who are the top students? Let's headhunt them. And so they'll come, and that's what happened to me. So a firm came, they were looking for a civil litigator. They liked me. And so in between my second and third year of law school, I ended up basically what they call a summer associate. It's an intern, in Sacramento. It's a very prominent firm in Sacramento. And you know, they wine and dine you, right? They pay you. It was so, I had been a butler before this, like quite literally. I think I was making like good money. It was like $300 a day at the time. Um, but they were paying me thousands of dollars, and it was like absurd. And so I kind of progressed from there. I was like, okay, this is awesome. This is fun. And then after I did the summer, they gave me a job offer, and so that's really, I never applied to any jobs really in my whole life. It's just sort of this stuff has kind of found me. So then I worked at that firm for a couple years. So I did the summer there, and then I think I either did 2 or 3 years right after law school, and I learned so much. My time at that firm was invaluable. There's so many, well-established attorneys that you learn from, and attorneys that don't get that opportunity. It's invaluable. So many people are great attorneys that don't have that path, but it gave me, I think, a really big leg up, and it kind of established me in the Sacramento community too. So, for example, different boards, like for young attorneys, they'd be like, "Hey, will you be on our board? You're at this law firm," kind of thing. So it really opened up doors for me.
That's amazing. Yeah, it sounds like it was kind of the snowball effect. You worked really hard in that first year of law school. You got headhunted by a prestigious law firm, and then doors just continued to open. I'm really happy to hear that's what your experience was like. I do have sort of a two-part question here, both relatively broad. But could you just maybe talk about some of the things you really love about the law that you practice, and then maybe on the back end of that, also talk about some things that you would like to see change within the industry of, or in the sector of law?
Okay. Great questions. So I love helping people. I do. I'm a true believer. I don't take on cases that I think are, quote unquote frivolous or without merit. I have clients, I work with them so closely. I take on a very few number of clients. I haven't taken on a new case in maybe 8 months. So, these people, I work with them for years at a time, and they come to me at a very extremely vulnerable and low part in their life. And so being able to help them is honestly what keeps me going because it's tough. We're engaged in a process where there's a million pressure points, and if you're not screwing someone over on those, they're trying to screw you over on them, right? It's like this really tough thing. They're trying to take advantage of every mistake, so there's a lot of stress in that respect. But when you do a good job, it's just that's really the reward, and you change people's lives. So I've had clients who've gone after large companies. They're making minimum wage, and I get them a large amount of money that changes their life. And so it's not a Robin Hood type thing, but I feel like I'm battling corporations on behalf of hardworking people. And just kind of like what I've talked about, I'm a competitive person, and so I get to rely on that. And I always kind of joke that you know being a true believer and having that kind of like anger, like, oh, I can't believe they did that, that drives work product. That keeps you working Saturday night at 10 p.m. because you know that by doing that, you're gonna your client's gonna reap the rewards. So that's really cool. I mentioned I do contingency, which means I don't get paid unless I win. And I'm kind of a cowboy like that. Like, I'm like, let's gamble. I think we got the case. Let's go, right? I've had cases I put in, 1,000 hours, and I haven't seen a penny because the company folds or they do something, that, I'd call shady, but like it results in my client not getting anything and I don't get anything. And, that's a tough pill to swallow. Um, as far as what I would change in the industry, I don't purport to have that type of knowledge or authority. Like, as background, law is, it's a very established thing. We get our law from English common law, which came from like the 1500s. It's all these very learned people have come up with these rules and these different processes that allows it might be the cornerstone of a functioning society. And so, what would I change about it fundamentally? I don't know that I would. Um, I would change how certain things are practiced. So, for example, there's this kind of cliche about LA attorneys that, they're just jerks and you got to get everything in writing. And I found that to be true. There's theories of why that is. That the LA bar is so big that you're not going to run into the same attorney more than once, maybe, so you can screw them over and not worry about it. Um, you know, you got to sleep at night, so there's that. But if I'm on my, if you're giving me a platform here to say what would you change, corporations have limited liability, and that's a really strange thing to me. If I think of the most impactful inventions of all time, it's limited liability, right? It's saying you can't get sued for more than whatever your investment was in. Even if you do something terrible, you screw someone over, your liability is limited. And to the extent that there are a lot of reasons why that's a good thing, and it's done a lot of it's allowed for a lot of progress. Um, you know, I think it should come at a higher cost. I think if you have limited liability, you should be paying a lot of taxes, right? It should be one of those benefits. You shouldn't, as a corporation, you shouldn't be paying less taxes than, for example, the solo practitioner guy or the guy that's coming over there to do your yard work. And, he's not a corporation, but he accidentally, does something and causes a bunch of damage. I mean, he has no protection. But he's paying, more taxes than the corporation. And so that's something I think maybe attorneys can lead the charge on. And just, that's something that definitely bothers me. And that's one of the reasons why I've never incorporated um, anything, right? I stay as just kind of, this is me. I have insurance that protects me from liability. But at the end of the day, I'm choosing not to, consciously choosing not to engage in that. And, my accountant will yell at me and, my wife will be like, "You got to do it," but it's it's something that I kind of just hold on to.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that you're not incorporated because it kind of brings me to my next question, which is you are, and correct me if I'm wrong, technically a small business owner, would it be, since you own your own firm? Um, uh, what made you go from being an attorney, practicing law, to saying, "Hey, I want to do that, but I also want to own my own firm and sort of run my own shop"? What was that made you make that transition?
Yeah. Well, first I'll kind of, I have my own shop, but there's really no difference. So, legally speaking, there's no difference between me and the law offices of Connor W. Olson. So, when you set up a corporation, it's considered a separate legal entity. And that's why if it gets sued, the owner isn't getting sued individually. So, there's that little separation there. There's no difference between, the law offices of Connor Olson and me. There's no difference between Connor Olson's Banana Bread Company and me. Um, but to get to your point, and attorneys are very pedantic. Well, you say something, we'll pick it apart and be like, "No, do you mean this?" But you know, to address your question, I, for better or worse, I have this personality where I'm like, if I want to do something, I want to do it my way, and if I think someone else isn't doing it the right way, it burns me, right? I'm like, I got to do it my way. I don't want to, do it your way. And I don't want to be, and law firms are a little interesting. They're partnerships. And that's a whole nother thing. A partnership is different than a corporation. But the way partnerships work is you're basically in business with 40 other, 50 other attorneys. And the idea of having to make decisions with all these people about my finances and my work is just, it was something I didn't want to deal with. Um, and so early on, I was sort of like, well, let me learn as much as I can, and then let me just see if I can do this on my own, and let me see if I can, hang my shingle, as they say. And so after a few years, I spread my wings pretty early compared to most people, and it wasn't like immediate success. It was, I might have mentioned this before the call, whatever walked through the door, I was like, I got you, right? Let's do this. Um, and so, but being your own boss, quote unquote, it's a different kind of aspect, and it doesn't mean you get to take vacations all the time or not work. I work nonstop, and I don't mean to glorify the quote unquote hustle culture. I mean, that's not what I'm about. I do it because I'm passionate about it. um, I always tell people, if you met my mom and my dad, you'd understand me. They're workaholics too, and it's just sort of what I was raised on. And when I'm not working, I'm volunteering somewhere. It's just, I don't like sitting still. I don't watch too much TV. It's just kind of, it keeps me going.
Yeah, I can't think of a greater motivator for work than the one that you had explained, where you're like, "Hey, if I win this case, I might be changing somebody's life. This might be a client that's making minimum wage, and I'm their only resource against this highly resourceful corporation. And this could really create a better livelihood for this person. So I think that's it's a beautiful job that you have. It's a beautiful thing that you do. Sort of to take it full circle. So I really appreciate you walking us through your journey of tennis at Sonoma State, getting into Santa Clara for law, getting hunted by the big corporation, for the big corporate law firm, for having stellar grades your first year, to finding civil litigation, to opening up your own shop, so to speak. Could you, if there was somebody listening right now, maybe a law student, maybe the Sonoma State tennis player, right, wherever you were in those phases, if there's somebody in that phase right now listening, wanting to do exactly what you're doing now, they wanted to end up being very similar to what Connor Olson does as an attorney, what sort of advice would you give them, no matter where they are in that process?
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I still feel like a kid, so I never feel qualified to give that advice. I can say what, when I worked for a lot of a group of very wealthy people, and they'd always give you advice, right? And the kind of main one that I took to heart was, just keep your nose down and your pencil sharp, right? There's always going to be distractions. There's always going to be fun stuff and other stuff to do. And I'm not saying, don't go and do that stuff. Um, but if you really want to do and get somewhere, it usually requires a lot of work. It just does. And that usually, it comes back. It rewards you. And I always think, time passes no matter what. So in a month from now, if I sit and watch a lot of TV, in a month from now, what's happened? If I sit and work super hard in a month from now, I have that benefit of that work that I put in. And so it's like, you know, take care of your future self by putting in the work now. And if you want to, if you get there and you decide, I don't think that's really for me, the worst thing is that you learned a lot, right? You learned a lot and you pushed yourself. And so I don't think the downside is there. Maybe conversely, you miss out on some experiences and maybe I'm going to be 55 and be like, damn, I wish I would have, gone to that concert, or I wish I would have done all those things. So again, don't take this as gospel, but you know, if, if you want to get to a position where, um, you know, if you want to excel, you're usually going to have to do hard work. I don't think there's any, unless you got family connections, rely on those. But otherwise, I don't think there's any substitute for really just getting to the grindstone.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up your future self because it again sort of segues to my next question perfectly. It's my last question of the episode, and again, I really appreciate your time today. And so I started the first question being, so what do you do? And my last question for you is, so what will you do next? Where do you see your future in law? Let's say in the next 5 to 10 years.
Whew, I've thought a lot about growing my practice and bringing other attorneys on to make it easier. So that's a path. I try not to think about it too much, and that might be kind of a flaw for me, right? I don't plan as much. Like I said, it's kind of watered down a hill. I do try to work and see where it takes me. So, realistically, I'll probably still be doing what I'm doing. I'd like to be more involved in um, I do really appreciate what I do and what I offer to my clients, but I'd like to be in something more constructive and less adversarial. And so, I work with a number of nonprofits, and so if I can expand my role with them, that would be something. Um, you know, Banana bread makes people happy. No one's ever crying over banana bread. So if I could, find a way to kind of make that into something, I'd like to do that. I also don't want to turn something that I'm passionate about into a job, if that makes sense. So I don't necessarily want to go full out that route, but my whole life I've done, I've tried to do a number of different things. I'm kind of, I really appreciate that you're doing podcasts, right? It's sort of like, let me just go explore something. I met you, I think, on a catwalk at Macy's in Santana Row or something like that. Um, so I think I want to just try everything. I want to, the worst you can do is fail, and you can really minimize what failure looks like too, right? I'm not investing my life savings in something. I tend to take a really measured and minimal approach and say, I'm going to do banana bread, but I'm going to do it once a week and I'm going to see how it works out, right? Or, these things that don't take a lot of investment. So I think I'll continue to do that. I'd love to write a book. And I basically write for a living. I write and argue for a living, and writing has, I never thought it would be a passion of mine, but it really has turned into something that I'm very passionate about. And so I'm kind of waiting for inspiration as far as what maybe I'll write about, but that's something I could easily see. Maybe not in the next 5 years because I have enough cases that I'm gonna be busy for the next 5 years. But if I look a little more forward, I could see that being my path.
That sounds like an incredible outlook on your future, and I would really look forward to reading that book. I do want to touch on a general point just really quick that you made. When you brought up how we met, we did just meet through modeling and acting, and I think it's important for listeners to hear that because while you may have this singular trajectory on this one professional route that you want to take, trying things like acting and modeling, or making banana bread, things that you're passionate about, even if it's incrementally just on a weekly basis, it can lead to all types of different opportunities. For example, us meeting through acting and modeling, and now I get to interview you, a practicing attorney. So think that's a really great point. I just wanted to end with, again, just appreciating you so much for your time. I know how busy you are. So thank you so much for coming on, and we really enjoyed having you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and it's inspiring to see people doing stuff. Just going out there doing a podcast. Like I would love to do a podcast. I don't have the time, but like to see you do it, that's why I was so excited to be on it, really, because it's infectious, and it's putting in that time, right? I don't know how many views you get or whatever, but over time, it's you build up the work, you do the work, and then the rewards come. There's nothing comes easy, and if it does, that's luck.
Right. Hey, and just on an end note, really quick, because we do have some Sacramento listeners. Do you just want to quickly shout out where your banana bread is?
Yeah, so for the next few weeks, because of trial, I won't be able to be delivering this, but normally you can get it there's two Naked Coffees. There's one on P and 15th, and then there's one in Curtis Park. And then there's also Tupelo, which is over by Sac State. I think it's off like 54th or something like that. And then occasionally I'll be doing a vegan one and a pumpkin one at Dobot, which is, I think, on like 11th and T or 11th and U.
All right. Well, you guys heard it. Dobot, Tupelo, and both of the Naked Coffees. Connor, thank you so much, and good luck with all your work ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kieran.